in geography and journalism. I was a dual major. That's my graduation there at my hubs. You can tell that we both got fat and hairy between Syracuse and LSU, but I did my master's in science at Louisiana State University, graduated in 2014. I was a geography major with a minor in mass comm. And then I came to Florida State University in 2016 to do my PhD. And for the last 2 years, I've been working on my dissertation while working for the state. So my research interests before this really kind of centered around natural hazards. So when I was young, I lived through a multitude of kind of weather extreme events. I was in my first tornado when I was 8, and that was in rural Pennsylvania. It was let's see, June, I think 2nd or 3rd of 1998, and there hasn't been a single tornado to touch down in or cross the state of Pennsylvania stronger than the one that went by my house, and it was an EF4 tornado. Crossed through, I think, first at Bedford County and then to where I was living. So we moved not long after that to the Gulf Coast of Mississippi because, of course, you know, when you have been through a horrible extreme weather tragedy, the thing you should do first is move to a place that has, you know, many experiences with horrible weather tragedies. And that summer, Hurricane George hit, which for all purposes that matter was essentially a Category 4 hurricane. And I saw alligators swimming down the streets with people. For a kid from central Pennsylvania, that was a very strange thing. And saw how it reshaped all these islands that I had been to, and I had never seen an island before, just in like a day. And I think ever since then, I was really, really fascinated with weather and how it shapes their surface. And of course, I went through Katrina. I lost family in Katrina several years later, which sort of cemented my path, I think. So hurricanes were obviously important to me. And I published some research in the journal Coastal Research and some other places about, you know, extreme weather impacts and looking at catastrophism. Which led me kind of the natural next place, which was climate change. And I worked for the state of Louisiana, and after I graduated and worked with their modeling, and I'm going to move my little face up here because I don't think I ever put anything up there. Modeling basically hurricanes and climate change together. And I really wanted to be someone who focused on communicating about hurricanes and climate change, because I did go and I, you know, got these dual majors and minors in communications because I thought it was very, very important to be an effective communicator about science. So then I went to the Florida Department of Health during my PhD, you know, to do it for the mortgage, which is a lie because my credit was so bad when we moved here that we would never have gotten approved for a mortgage. But to basically pay the bills after I was done with my coursework and done with teaching. COVID-19 kind of popped up early on in January for me because I had been attached to the what we call ESF8 unit within DOH, which is emergency response. And that's actually how I got that job, was to work with hurricane response. During those periods, there's a lot of grunt work, like modeling how many patients you need to move, where all the hospitals that they have available beds are, plotting their routes, using ambulances as efficiently as possible, you know, stuff that doesn't sound sexy, but it gets people out of harm's way. And then I started working on influenza and hepatitis A when COVID-19 kind of popped up. And that meant, you know, working at the Emergency Operations Center, which I thought was the coolest thing ever because it looked like NASA. That's me there with my Department of Emergency Management counterpart, and was really working hard on this. So, as you guys might know, as geography people, Johns Hopkins launched their dashboard of cases of COVID in January 23rd. that day, I actually forwarded it to my superiors and the heads of DOH and said, hey, I think we could build something for surveillance like this. I think we need some kind of public information system or data system for whenever it gets here, because we were getting emails from the CDC that said, plan for a pandemic. So that's what I was trying to do. And they were basically like, oh, no, it's not going to come over here. Kind of blasé about it. But by February 18th, Florida, without telling anybody, was monitoring, 521 people. We didn't have an information system in place. A lot of our government officials were lying, just straight up lying about what our concerns were at that point in the state. This is actually a photograph of an internal document that I took when I began to see the writing on the wall and start backing up records. And by this point, I was still bugging them about, okay, we could at least have like a count by county of how many people we're surveillancing, what testing activities going on, information on where people can get tested if they want to or need to. And then I was told that it would cause a panic and that releasing any information about what was really going on was only going to scare people, which I completely and adamantly disagreed with. I thought people were already terrified, and that by providing information, they would feel like there was transparency and that the state was handling this and on top of this, which it wasn't. Until March 12th, the day that Donald Trump declared COVID a national emergency. I was very suddenly, about an hour after that press conference that he did that, told that I needed to get the dashboard I had been asking to build for 6 weeks up by like the end of the day. And I think if I hadn't been bugging them so much about it and hadn't done so many mock-ups to kind of show them what it would look like, should they give us permission, that wouldn't have been possible. But I did, and I had it up that day. And, it went under some transformations along the way, bumpy in the beginning, trying to process all of our surveillance data. I basically was given thousands of lines of raw data with 280 some variables and had to concatenate it down to basically information that didn't disclose any, privacy issues and would be suitable for the public and that we could use for the display. So worked on it, proved it, made it better here and there. And then, I kind of hit like what you think of like is the height of, success is having like your alumni university acknowledge, the work that you're doing. And Esri wrote a blog post about what I was doing and how do I make this go away? Go away. How do I make the menu go away? You guys can't see that menu thing up there, can you? Anybody know? Paused.
No.
Okay.
No, we can't.
Okay. Because it like covered half my screen there for a second. So things were going good. I had a lot of kind of, like internal geography press going on about all the hard work that I'd put into this thing. I coded it myself. I did the analysis. I worked, I was obviously working internally, trying to find hotspots to prioritize strike teams and testing locations. And it was literally, I left every single morning before my kids got up, and I got back around midnight every night. And it went this way for a long time. The second tornado to ever impact me, it destroyed my parents' house on Easter Sunday. There were 2 EF4 tornadoes that ran almost parallel to each other in Mississippi on Easter. And one of them went over my parents' house and completely just blew it away. Killed 3 of their neighbors. Luckily, my family wasn't home, but storms seem to just chase us no matter where we go. And I didn't even miss work, not for a second, because that's how committed and important I thought this project was. Even the Surgeon General himself mentioned how proud he was of, his GIS staff, which was me, doing this work. So, we're talking about like GIS, getting like a spotlight in geography and its role here. And it was super important, and eventually got to the place where like this happened. Make sure that you guys can hear it. So if you don't know, that is Dr. Deborah Birx, who is on, the White House COVID-19 response team and is famous for her lovely scarves. And she...
Rebecca, I don't know if you want to try that again. We couldn't hear that clip.
Oh, okay. Is there a way to turn up the volume on this? I don't see. Can you guys hear that?
Nope.
Okay. Ah. We'll pull it up then. Can you hear it now?
No.
All right. Well, I will go back to the PowerPoint then. Chat. Deborah Birx, I'll send you guys links to this later, is, like I mentioned, on the White House Council response team. And she spends a few minutes on several networks this day, on April 20th, basically saying that Florida has the best website and data system in the country. Everybody should go there. It is the height of what we should be doing. And, for a geographer who's, managing GIS for the Department of Health, that's about as big as I ever thought anything I did would ever get. That was pretty incredible. And, it wasn't without effort, tireless effort. And honestly, I think part of the reason why ours was so good in the beginning is because from the start, I made transparency central to everything I did. Everything that we published had a full data description. If anybody had questions, they could email me directly, and I answered every single one. Even angry people who emailed me told me that I was trying to make it look worse to help the left, or I was trying to make it look better than it was to help the right. I spoke to every single one of those people, recognizing that people were scared and didn't understand and just wanted to speak to somebody about this thing that was being thrown at them. And I thought that was very important. And so for me, that was a big deal. I didn't think I could possibly get any further than that. On April 26th, the dashboard hit 100 million views. And I had somewhat joked with the Epi team that if the dashboard ever hit that, I'd buy a cake and have a party. And thinking that there's only like 12 or whatever million people in Florida, it was impossible. Nobody would care about a science website. So we had a cake and we had a party. But those reappeared. While this was going on, however, and I was too busy working to even attempt to keep up with the news. There were a lot of national pressure sources for us to be doing things different than what we were doing. Since you can't hear these, can you guys hear that one?
Nope.
No.
Okay. Well, Trump here saying on March 15th that he wants to open up by Easter. Easter came and went, and then, that's... So on April 16th, Trump says at a press conference that he's been speaking to governors about opening up and thinks that the press will have some very good things to report about in the next several days. This was all happening behind the scenes. I had no idea. 2 days later, DeSantis put together a reopening committee. that was hundreds of business people. Our director of infectious disease was not on it. Our director of disease control and health protection, the agency, was not on it. No one who had been working the response was on the reopening committee. Not one. Hundreds of people who literally the CEO of Publix and, you know, representatives of major corporations in the transportation sector, people had no business driving reopening, were on the task force. I didn't know it had been created. No, you go away. Until April 28th, when 26th, I'm sorry, I was asked to work with EPI to come up with the reopening criteria because the governor was going to open on May 4th. And this was not something we had even discussed. We were working so hard just to stabilize things. The idea of opening things was insane. Let me check my time real quick. Okay. And just to be told, basically, you need to come up with this criteria, you need to analyze it, you need to have your results ready and for presentation and on the dashboard by Sunday. And this was a call I got Friday, was on top of running the system all the while, shocking to us at DOH, the people who are actually doing the work and who were doing the analysis. But like everything else, we managed to make it work. We worked all night, looking at the White House criteria, looking at what we felt based on what data we had was appropriate, and coming up with ways to measure the trends to see which counties could open. When I presented that data, the results of that Sunday, the reopening plan was actually being stapled right in front of me. And again, no one else had seen this data because I was presenting it for the first time. The criteria had not even existed until the day before, but the finalized plan was being printed and stapled in front of me. And that wasn't a good sign. And when I presented the numbers that basically said 3 counties in the whole state could reopen, I, in so many words, was told to change the data. To change the actual raw data that was used to make the analysis so that the analysis will look favorable so that all but 3 counties of our 67 could reopen. And I said no. Honestly, I didn't think anything of it. The idea that, having come from a climate background, that anybody would intentionally manipulate raw data about people, no less, to further a political agenda or a plan that was not based in science was absurd and insulting to me. And I said no as quickly as I was asked. And I think it was, you know, years of being in climate science and knowing that everything that you do is under a microscope. Everything has to be reproducible. Everything has to be triple, quadruple checked every single time. And you do not go in and just start changing numbers so that it looks the way that you want it to look. If you did that as a climate scientist and anybody ever caught you, you that's it, goodbye. You know, like no one would ever take you seriously ever again. And I think that kind of just natural instinct of being offended by it kind of kicked in, and I laughed at her and said no. I didn't really laugh, I chuckled. I don't want to say I laughed. But nevertheless, 2 days later, a vendor was hired to do the analysis because after they came to me to do it, they went back to EPI and asked them to change the numbers, and the epidemiologist said no. So then they hired somebody who would produce analysis that uncoincidentally matched exactly what they wanted to do by the time they were ready to reopen. And it sucks that you guys can't hear this because it's so important.
You can just share the screen, like go to the share option and select the application that you're using for the video, or whether it's the browser, and then we all can see it and hear it.
Share content?
Yes, and then either select screen or application.
That's what I have right now. Well, I'll have this presentation sent out to you guys so you can kind of watch them in order. But basically, on May 4th, DeSantis goes out and tells everybody the lies, the fake numbers, in order of exactly how they were manipulated. And I raised objections internally. And that next day, after we reopened, I was taken off the dashboard. There wasn't a discussion about it. There was no way for me to appeal it. I still had my job. I was still managing GIS. I was too important to hurricane season for them to just get rid of me at that time. And that was it. A project that I proposed almost obnoxiously for 6 weeks and was told no. Then for like the next 2 months, put every ounce of what I had into by myself. I didn't have a backup, which is, by the way, the worst plan ever. Always have like 5 backups, because there were days where I was so exhausted that I thought I was going to die. I'm not kidding you. And then just to be thrown off of it because I refused to manipulate the numbers, and then when they did it anyways, you know, I said this was the wrong call, was very obviously crappy. So here's what I want to say if you're ever put in a situation like this. This is one of those broader soul searching type things, is that you need to define who you are and what you stand for. If you are a scientist and you are committed to the pillars of science and truth and transparency, then that is who you are and that is who you need to be. And you don't ever come off that ladder, ever, for anything or anyone. When your things start to get controversial within your office, you need to make sure that you very clearly and thoroughly communicate everything that you think is wrong. Even if it's like a 5,000 word essay that you send, you know, to your boss about why these specific numbers changing is misleading, that is what you have to do. And not only do you do that, you keep the proof you did it. Florida has supposedly this sunshine like transparency law where every email communication with state personnel and health officials is supposed to be accessible through public records request. My own lawyer put in a records request for my own emails in May, and we still have not heard back. Nobody's gotten them. So don't depend on the agency that's trying to do things unethical to provide the evidence that you spoke out should it go south. So back that stuff up on not your work or school computer, somewhere else where you can get to it if you need it. I really can't emphasize enough the importance of documentation. And if you're ever asked to do something unethical, this honestly is the most important thing you can do. You can call an old professor or some kind of professional friend who you feel understands you and what your problems might be with it. Sometimes you might be wrong about why something is unethical or not understand it. And having that discussion can help you sort through some of that if you're calling somebody who's an expert in something. But what I actually did when it happened was I called one of my journalism professors from Syracuse and told him what happened and said I needed help. And because this was somebody who knew me and what I stood for, because I never shied away from letting people know, he helped me find a First Amendment lawyer who has argued in front of the Supreme Court and won, pro bono, and like a strike team to help you with dealing with media crisis and all of that stuff. Lean on the people that you know you and know that you would have done what was right. Again, document everything. The first real big red flag in this was when in April, early April, everybody above us started saying that we weren't supposed to talk via email anymore, because all of our emails were subject to public records requests. So they moved all of our offices into one space so that we could be around each other and not have to ask questions across email, which totally went against our whole like lockdown policy and remote working policy. But I did not follow that. That is a red flag. If somebody's saying, oh, make sure you don't have any records of what we're asking you to do, that's exactly when you need a record of what someone's asking you to do. And if you ever end up in the situation I did, report it through whatever official channels in your agency have to be reported, even if you think they're not going to do anything about it. File that whistleblower complaint, file, it with HR or somebody so that you have proof that you stood up and you said something before you left, and then leave. Get out of there. If somebody is asking you to do something you feel is morally wrong during a crisis that could and did, for me, end up costing the lives of thousands of people, you leave. You stand up for what is right and you leave. So after my, rise to pseudo celebrity in my field, there was my fall from grace. I sent these messages to my family on April 26th, saying that I was not okay, that I wanted to quit, that I was being asked to manipulate data, and more people were going to die. And I did not agree to that. Luckily, I am an open communicator with people I care about, so I have all these text messages and stuff to prove what was happening, but that is how upsetting it was to me. I couldn't sleep. I did not sleep the night this happened at all. I just laid in bed just thinking about it. We were asked to run the projections of, because we expected to see, or the state did officially, some increase in cases when you start to reopen things. But what our models were showing, and what a lot of models were showing, was that this isn't going to be a few cases. This is going to be, potentially 10,000 a day. And the original projection was 4,000 deaths by August 1st. We are now over 13,000 deaths in Florida right now. And we did all that work. We showed them those projections. They knew what was going to happen. They did it anyway. And I felt sick over it. The day I was taken off the dashboard, I threatened to quit. I said that this was wrong and I don't want to be a part of it. And my boss texted me that day and asked me not to quit. Actually asked me several times not to quit because they needed me for hurricane season. He thought it was wrong that I was taken off the dashboard and he was going to fight it. But despite all that, May 18th, Monday, the day that the state was pushed into full phase 1 prematurely, I was fired. And you guys can watch the videos later, but there's a clip on MSNBC about how I was fired. And even Colbert did a bit about it. Colbert's my long lost love. I don't know if you follow me on Twitter, but I have this running gag about how Colbert won't interview me, even though he keeps talking about me. And I'm pretty sure his people know about it, by the way, and they're like playing into it, and it's insufferable. But I decided that, like, you guys can't hear this, but basically DeSantis came out and the words he said was, she was not the chief architect of our web portal. She's not a data scientist. She had nothing to do with it, and she's a troublemaker. Which again, considering all the press that the state, Dr. Deborah Birx had done about it, and the Surgeon General himself had said about my work, was kind of surprising to say the least. And I watched, let's see, I was fired Monday before I was able to file the whistleblower complaint for 5 days as this just became insane. My whole life was just strung out. A college affair that I had with a guy who was very abusive was pulled out, and I had written about him in a blog online that named him for part of like a women's survivors series. And, he claimed that it was cyber harassment to name him in a blog and call him an abuser. But that was somehow pulled out, and I was accused of being under active investigation for sexual harassment. And so it was shocking. And so I stayed quiet. I stayed quiet for 5 days. I had this strike team. I had these lawyers. Everybody was telling me I needed to get in front of this. I needed to say something. I needed to, have a presence. And I was just a scientist who was, are you guys froze? I'm seeing messages that you're froze. Can you guys see? Can you hear me still?
Yeah, we can hear you, but the slide that you showed, we're still on the timeline slide. We did not go further than any of this. Is that the last slide you showed, or?
Right now it just says quiet.
No, I think we're all, yes. Now it's just changed, but
okay.
This one
it's just said quiet this whole time. So I was quiet. That's why it says that. I did not feel comfortable going in front of a camera on a national news show to talk about how I was fired because I didn't do one thing bad. I didn't do one bad thing. And that resulted in the governor of my state publicly, viciously attacking me. And eventually, 5 days later, decided that I could do it. I was terrified. I was shaking the whole time. Chris Cuomo had reached out to me at the beginning of all of this. And most of the time, if you ever find yourself in this crazy situation, you're going to get calls and texts from every news agency in the world except for Fox News, who's never once reached out to me. And it's usually going to be a booking agent or a representative from the show who wants to see if you'll come on. But Chris Cuomo called me directly. He actually video called me. And I thought that was brave. So I talked to him for background to make him understand why it was dangerous that the state was doing this, not about what happened to me, but my concerns with the state. So 5 days after all of that, I decided I could just swallow it and go on TV. And I did. And it was crazy. And I disappeared again for a few weeks after that because I was terrified and mortified of the idea of being in the public spotlight. And it was awful. But then things started to change in Florida, exactly as myself and others had said they would when they reopened. And I decided that I had to present the information that basically the state wasn't releasing or was releasing in hidden pockets in their data system that I had built, needed to be shown. Because what happened when I was fired was half of the state of Florida didn't trust the dashboard that I had built for the state anymore. And they didn't feel like they had a place that they could go to for accurate information. And that hole was partly my fault. And I felt almost a moral obligation to fix it. So I built my second dashboard. I pulled in all the DOH data. They always had a lot of data that they never showed on the dashboard that was extremely important, like non-resident deaths and cases, which apparently don't count. Pulled that in. They publish, I think, something in the order of 50,000 pages worth of PDF data every day that's buried on their website because they don't want anybody to actually go through it or to easily get it. So I started, writing web scrapers to pull all of that and put it into the website. And at first I didn't think anybody would care or really even notice, but that turned out not to be the case. I went to sleep with my GoFundMe from getting fired at about $5,000, I think, the night I launched it, June 11th. And because of the press in Florida, when I woke up the next day, it was $55,000. And now I've raised close to $275,000 to do all of this all from public crowdsourcing, not a single corporate or official sponsor or anything like that. Just people in Florida and really across the country too, but mostly Florida, who not only wanted to, just say, oh, you go girl, you give $5 or something like that, but felt like they needed it. They needed this information. And I decided that I was going to stick with it as long as it was needed. And that became a growing kind of project. I started exploring more with other applications. This is kind of the new modern interface for everything that I built. And of course, now that I had done all of this, there were a lot more press outlets that were willing to hear my story and hear about what happened to me, because what DeSantis's argument that was that basically that I was inexperienced and I wouldn't know how to do any of the stuff that I was doing. And so when I basically did it independently, people actually wanted to hear what was going on. So, NPR Morning Edition wanted to have me on. The New York Times did, articles about me, and I was on CNN New Day like 5 times, and like Lawrence O'Donnell like 5 times. Oops. And we'll just skip that part. As this kind of grew out, there became growing interest in other areas. So throughout the entire kind of COVID surveillance period, schools were closed. They closed in Florida officially after spring break, but because we had spring break, they were closed that week as well, which was like March 15th, I think. And so since we really had cases, everything was shut down for kids, and they were the single most isolated group demographic throughout the whole time period. And then we were facing this new challenge that was unprecedented for us, and that was schools reopening. And there was no central resource in the country that was going to track this. The CDC had basically had its legs chopped off when Trump ordered everything to go through Health and Human Services. Every state was basically doing its own separate thing, or leaving up to the counties, and it was kind of a mess. And so I decided to build this thing called the COVID Monitor, which at first was a way for people, teachers, parents, school officials, to kind of anonymously report cases in their schools if the district wasn't reporting it or something like that. And after a few weeks, Mississippi started reporting statewide, and then Hawaii, and then Kentucky, Tennessee, South Carolina. One by one, the states started to really kind of fill in. And I took this screenshot in particular because this was the B-roll that they decided to use for my article in a local news station. And it's like, I guess, the Matrix code on top of what looks like a server room, which is hilarious and nothing that I do. But at least they gave me the decency of calling me a former Florida scientist instead of a fired Florida scientist, even though they snuck it in there underneath the bottom. There's a whole sexist history as to how women who are ousted are insubordinate, which is a title I now own, or they're, fired or ousted or something like that. But like people like Edward Snowden are like the former national security person or the whistleblower national security person. But I'm like fired Florida data scientist, which is, great. And then, the Daily Beast just kind of went all at it and called me Ron DeSantis's worst, that's our governor, worst nightmare. And to be called your governor's worst nightmare just for reporting information is insane to me. It's absolutely bonkers. So this is what the COVID Monitor summary page looks like now. It's thecovidmonitor.com. You guys can go check it out. Certainly, share it as much as you can. We have reporting by state and districts. So the ones that are officially reporting are included there. Separately, we track all the public reports that we've had, and then verified reports, which can be press releases or news articles or other kind of secondary sources other than the districts themselves. And I took this screenshot this morning so that I have the most current data, but it's probably risen since then. But so far, we've confirmed 20,000 cases in schools in the United States. And under the pending, you'll see there's another 17,000. So this is really everything that we kind of expected would happen, unfortunately. But we're really the only central resource for this information right now, which again is insane to me because I'm just a geographer that's trying to track information. And to be, this person who's now leading this it's madness, honestly. And this whole like journey has been insane. I was named one of Fortune magazine's 40 under 40 a couple weeks ago. This morning, apparently, Elemental, which is a Medium publication, listed me right there second in the circle as one of the 50 experts to trust. I'm in there with doctors and scientists and leaders of the world, and it feels strange that just me, imperfect, messed up, totally, insubordinate me is one of these people. It's bizarre. And it's a journey that honestly, I don't think I would have been able to make if I wasn't a geographer in the truest sense of the word, because I had that interdisciplinary knowledge. I understood the connectedness of all of the things that we were doing. And I really emphasized transparency in data and doing things in a way that would stand up to kind of the academic standards that we would expect. And if I hadn't done all that, I'd probably just be the data person who never said anything and is part of a team now that got thousands of people killed in Florida when there was absolutely no need for it. So that is my bit. And I don't know what you guys can see now. What do you guys see now?
Well, we're back, everybody here. So
okay,
we are all good to go. Thank you very much. That was a great presentation. So with the management group here, if you want to go ahead and ask a question, just unmute, ask the question, and then remember to remute, and Becca can answer. So we can do that functionally. So if you have a question, please go ahead.
and turn on your camera too so we can see your smiling face. I don't care if you're in pajamas and your hair is a mess. Some hair can't be tamed. So I totally get it. Nobody?
They're coming.
Rebecca, can I ask a question? So it seemed, there was a point of time when it looked like the numbers in Florida were going up really quickly. Could have been May, I'm not quite sure. This was what was then being called the second wave. Florida and Texas were going up. And then it seemed to even out and kind of drop a little bit. And it seemed like the peak was done and the numbers were coming down. So is that about when the reporting got a little iffy? Or what can you say about what is going on in Florida right now?
Not a whole lot, unfortunately, because Florida has not been clear or transparent or fair in its reporting. We were testing 100,000 people a day in July, and then we had a hurricane scare, shut down most of the labs in the state, even though it came nowhere near us, and then just never reopened them. And we test between 15 and 20,000 people a day now. Most of the testing that they do is repeat testing, so hospital clinicians, things like that. They stopped publishing a lot of the data altogether. There were 8 data feeds that I managed, different types of surveillance, case data, things like that. They deleted all but 3. So they deleted 5 of the 8 feeds, so you can't even get that data anymore. And kind of a perfect example of how much faith I put into Florida's data, they reported a 2-year-old boy had died yesterday. And he was a non-resident, so they don't include non-residents in their pediatric report or their demographic data, none of them. They just kick them out. So the only place that you could find his death was on one of the data feeds that I had put in place before I left. And it listed yes or no for every person in a died field. And he was listed as died. And obviously, I track pediatric cases very closely. And so I tweeted about how there was a 2-year-old boy who died, and they had his county and everything listed in Escambia County, Florida, whose diagnosis date was September 4th. And I put a comment on there about, go ahead and tell me about how your mask makes it hard for you to breathe when there are babies dying in Florida because they can't breathe. And then the next day, DOH removed his death completely. They changed his yes in the died field to NA. Some of my reporter friends have been looking into it, investigating it. And one of them got a quote from the communications director here at DOH saying that they reviewed his death certificate, because they don't put a single person in there as died until they've got a death certificate in hand that lists COVID-19 as a cause. It has to have that. That was part of the process. They said they reviewed his case and decided that the death was not primarily caused by COVID. He was diagnosed 2 weeks ago, hospitalized almost immediately after, and died while in the hospital, but it had nothing to do with his coronavirus case. And not only is he dead, he is dead. They didn't deny that he was dead. But he looks alive in their data. He looks like a case that survived now because they changed his death status to NA. This kind of stuff happens all the time. I try to catch it and track it, but I have so little faith in it that I can't imagine the data person that I know is still there being okay with that decision. That's the first time that I've heard of them actually going in and changing somebody who is dead, who they say is dead, who was diagnosed 2 weeks ago and immediately hospitalized, a child, and then just changing it back. And I mean, that's going to screw up the statistics and the analysis and everything. That's just from a data standpoint horrible. But man, if that was my baby, because I have a 2-year-old, I would have lost my shit. I would have gone to the public. I'm sure that right now this is the last thing, I can say that now, but if that was me, that's the last thing I'd be thinking about in that crisis and that grief. But it's, I'm sure that my reporter friends will dig up what happened. And I wouldn't be surprised if they add them back, but they do that kind of stuff. So when people ask me about the numbers, I use their numbers. That's what I use on my website because that's all that there is. And I try to provide as much context as possible for those numbers and their limitations. But that's how much faith I have. And as schools are opening up, the state has refused to report the number of cases in schools. From just about half the counties right now, and here in Florida, our school districts are our counties. They're the same. So we have 67 counties. They're identical to the 67 school districts. Half of them are reporting independently. Good for them. Proudly insubordinate school districts. And just from that half, there's over 1,800 cases in schools, and schools opened up less than 3 weeks ago. And there are some counties like my own where they've had an increase in the last 2 weeks of 500 pediatric cases. And this is not a densely populated county that I live in. It's Leon. Nowhere near like Miami. I'm in the Panhandle. 500 high school age cases in the last 2 weeks. And the school district is only reporting 3 high school cases. So that 1,800 number is even with those nuances. It's going to make it impossible to study what works and what doesn't if we don't have valuable data. We could be spending tons of money on gimmicks that, people are saying, oh, this helps or that helps, that are completely ineffective. And we wouldn't be able to come to anything close to a definitive explanation of whether or not it works if we don't have any information about what happened. We could be developing predictive models. Say you have 10 students in a classroom of X square feet. One student is positive. What is the likelihood that, another student will become positive in, let's say, 10 days? We could be doing stuff like that to early alert systems, things like that. And we're not, because they refuse to release any of the information. And that's not just Florida. That's most places. That's all but like 5 states, actually. So yeah, it's a difficult, you have to deal with the data you have on the one hand, because there is no other source of information about cases than the Department of Health. But you also have to be very aware that they're capable of just making people undead. Sorry, that was a very long-winded answer. I get very upset. That just happened yesterday, and so it's incredibly frustrating.
So, Rebekah, this is maybe kind of a big loaded question, but I mean, COVID is obviously a major, huge public health issue in this country. But what does it say to us going forward as a society and as researchers and scientists working with data? What is it telling us if we can't be successful in using good information to make wise decisions, what the future might hold? I mean, it seems depressing that if we can't use the best science to get this addressed, where we may be in the future when we have all this great tools and we just can't use them. So any thoughts about the path we're heading down and what the future might show us just from how we're just dealing with this data set?
I want to say mostly what happened here in the United States with this situation was an anomaly. There were a lot of methods designed, although spreads differently, and obviously it's a different context, during the Ebola outbreaks in Africa that could have easily been applied here. If we, and a lot of those people who went over there were American scientists. The director of disease control, my boss's boss, led one of those efforts years ago. And they know how to track, report, model cases transparently. Ebola actually had one of the first really amazing kind of GIS applications of tracking the spread and cases all over, Africa. We could have done that and we didn't. That started early. It started at the very beginning. In Florida, we had a limited number of tests. And it's weird now to think of this, but back in the beginning, we had a very small number of tests available, like a couple hundred. And the only place to get them processed at that point in time was the CDC. So once you got them, you had to send them off to the CDC, and it could take weeks. And for the first month, we only tested people who had traveled from China or who were Chinese and had contact with people who traveled from China, because that was the messaging, that it was only there and it wasn't already here, which it was. We know that we had community spread in Florida in January. Now we know. But we didn't test anybody in Florida to know that at the time. We literally only went after those people. Not one of them, not one, tested positive. The first person to have any travel or contact with somebody from China was the 2,823rd case in Florida in late March. So literally from the beginning, because of politics, we screwed up. And we made conscious effort to make a mistake, which is strange. But that, I'm hoping, is an anomaly. We've done much better with other things in the past. We actually have some pretty advanced alert systems for hepatitis. I mean, I worked the hepatitis response here at DOH. We were doing some pretty huge investigative analysis. We have those capabilities, and we chose not to do it that way. It started literally from the first testing. And if we had been testing people in Florida or surveillancing even the ERs for cases that were symptomatic, similar symptoms tags as COVID-19, we would have found out that the first people who died in Florida died in late February from COVID. The first official death, I think, was like March 3rd, but we were aware of ones before that. But we didn't do any of that because it's a China virus. It's the, what did he call it? The Kung flu. And politics should never drive science. And if you make it drive it from the very beginning, everything you do after that is just going to be calamity. It literally, our first confirmed case had not traveled and had not had contact with any known case or someone who traveled. And so on day one, we knew what it was, but it was too late by then. And I'm hoping it has no indications for long term because, like I said, I want to believe this is an anomaly. And when we return to, I don't want to say normal, a way of doing things or a way of thinking nationally that looks to experts as leaders and not traitors, then maybe we can do it better the next time. But that's really all that you can hope for. I mean, if you look at climate change, which, you know, is my background, that's, there you go. That's what you're asking about. But the science itself is almost remains pure because every scientist who does that work knows what it means to have to be transparent. Reproducibility is if you cannot provide that, it doesn't matter what research you've done. If the exact same people can't get the exact same data, come up with the exact same results, it's no good. And I'm hoping that we can at least get to that again. I know it's not a very optimistic, but it is optimistic because I'm saying I think this is a fluke.
Good.
And I think science and the advancement of, you know, understanding how things work in our world and the huge role that geography played in this, by the way. I kind of liked that DeSantis said I was not a data scientist because I'm not. Data scientists are people who do things with like complex computational algorithms and enhancing like processing speed and things like that. That's not what I do. I'm a scientist who works with data, but every scientist works with data. That's, you know, what do they think scientists do? We just guess because we're smart. You know, we have data, we work with data. And geography's role in this was so instrumental. The spatial aspects of this were widely disregarded in a lot of places, and that really hurt a lot of research that was being done at first. So I think, if nothing else, I'm a famous geographer, and and that's a weird thing that I didn't think I'd ever see. Is somebody always in the news whose job is geography? And I've been really trying to emphasize that point that that's what I am. Like, I don't want to be called a data scientist. If you have to call me scientist because geographer is too mysterious and people don't understand it, which is what most news people tell me. They're like, if we say geographer, you're going to think you know capitals. I was like, okay, I am good at the capital game, but still, that's not anything to do with it. And I say at least scientist then. That's what you have to put. But in your article, you have to refer to me as a geographer. So people are reading about geography. They're learning about what geographer is. If you Google my name, I actually have a Wikipedia page now, which is crazy. And it says an American geographer. And I was like, that's the win. That is, if nothing else, I'm an American geographer on Wikipedia, and I've won that. So I got sidetracked again. So let's ask another question.
Yeah, go ahead, folks. I know we've got some smart, intriguing, interesting folks on the call here. So go ahead, ask some questions. Ishfaq, you got one?
Yeah, hello. Thank you for the presentation. It's really nice meeting you. So I had a question about the data and reporting structure, and you also alluded to some of that in your presentation. And just a bit background, I was starting from the summer, was working on some of the COVID-19 data, trying to map and maybe model early hotspot, and mostly focused on Midwest. And one of the things that came across was, as the data reported, there was some, each state would have different reporting times, and also, as you mentioned before, the exclusion of resident versus citizens and other specific issues that differ from state to state. So my question would be, was there during the early onset of the outbreak any directive to have a more standardized data from a higher level, or just have more consistent metadata, or is it left to the states themselves or the organization to just have their own sets of criteria for metadata and what to include and when to report even?
Yes. So no, there was no higher up directive. I actually designed our entire data schema. I chose what variables to put in, and I put in a lot. I don't know if you've ever looked at the master file that I published. There's a lot in there. Everything was mirrored for the people we tested and the people who were positive. because testing demographic information is just as important as your case information. That was another thing DOH stopped doing when I left. They just don't update the testing demographic information anymore. But no directive. I picked all of it, which is kind of funny because the same weekend, the weekend before Deborah Birx went off on her, White House, look at this state, this is the best state, I got a call from one of the directors of Esri saying that he just got out of a meeting with the high-level feds and they were going to take my data schema and they were going to make all the other states do it. Like that's how good it was, which was blowing my mind, the fact that my name was being, floated around in this place. I'm not, a week later I'd be asked to like lie about all that data, but that's the closest actually that we came to having a standardized data set. And if you look at some states now, you download their metadata, it does match Florida's. And so that directive was sent out. And that's the closest we came to a national standardized data schema. And it was mine. I should not be designing these things. It's the weirdest thing when you end up basically the right person at the worst time. And that's kind of how I like to phrase this experience. Because I looked at everything somewhat from my journalism background, truth and transparency. As much information as we can release without identifying someone should be released. And that makes it much easier for the press to be, well informed themselves and to inform other people. To plug into our APIs so that we can guarantee they're using our data and nobody else's. All of these other things that I just thought were the right way to do things became, oh my God, this is so revolutionary. And I was like, how the hell have you guys been doing it before? Like, that was my first question. I was like, do you guys not have plans when these things happen? Like, I felt that way. I was like, Jesus Christ, we all trust you to handle these things. And there's no plan? There's no plan. It's like me, this like 20, I think I was, how old am I now? 30. I was 30. Year old woman, I guess, a girl who's GIS manager for the Florida Department of Health, developed the standardization for every state in the country who's not even an epidemiologist. If we had any federal leadership whatsoever, that should have never happened. The CDC should have given everybody guidelines that this is, a minimum what you need to report. It needs to be reported in this way. They need to match these definitions. That is standardized reporting. That did not happen. Not until the end of April was there any advisement for how to do your data schema and structure, and it was mine. And I was just kind of winging it. So that's pretty awful, isn't it? I was just winging it, and that's what they took. They ran with it. 3 weeks before they fired me. And then claimed I didn't know what I was doing, which is, the extra special part of that.
Kim, do you have a question?
Yeah, I do. It's kind of off of the last one. I wanted to initially ask how the data was formatted when you initially got it and you started the dashboard. But now I kind of want to just ask if they're continually changing how they're measuring cases or even measuring who has technically died of COVID. All of the information that we're getting that a lot of people are using to model cases in the future is just made up information.
Yep. So they've made it very hard, and at least in Florida, to validate their testing information. So they have the laboratory report, and they list the number of positive, negative, and inconclusive test results that have been processed every day. Before that data gets to the public, DOH removes duplicate people by test type by lab. So if you've been tested 10 times at lab X, and you were negative, you count once. But if you were tested at lab X and you were positive 10 times, you also count once. And if you had an inconclusive, you count once, but only once each time. But if then you're tested at lab Y, you count there, and lab Z, you count there, and so on. So before that data even gets to the public, it's already scrubbed somewhat. And then they release their testing by day figures, which we can't validate because they've already scrubbed the lab data. And the testing figures are strange. I did a really good job of locking them into some reporting things. I was surprised that there wasn't outrage when they stopped reporting on testing, on the demographics of people who were tested, the race, ethnicity, age groups, locations, things like that, because it's so freaking important. But anyway, you can still get from the information that they provide the number of actual people they tested between days instead of those kind of duplicate tests. And it's now averaging about 25 to 30% of the number of people they're saying that they tested with all those duplicates. So, yeah, unless you intimately know this data this way, it is very difficult to kind of track and model. But luckily, there's only one person in the state who has worked with this data longer than I have, because I started with it, and that's the database manager who worked for EPI for years. She's the only person who's worked with it longer. So there's literally nobody else who knows this data better than I do. But there are a lot of researchers that I've been speaking with that I spoke to when I was there and afterwards to help explain these things, and they're doing excellent jobs. And their projections out have been very good. If anything, they've estimated deaths more than anything, but for cases, it's been very close. Like I said, at first, when we first showed them the model of what would happen if we opened prematurely, it was 4,000 deaths by August 1st. DeSantis's little, what was Jabba the Hutt's little thing called? I forget. Little thing. Yeah, that thing. His press secretary publicly said that when she was shaming me, that was outrageous and alarmist and never going to happen. I think we had 8,000 deaths by August 1st. So yeah, models are difficult to do when even before the data gets to you, it's messed with, but you still have to do what you can do. I mean, I kind of see it as a bare minimum. With the data they're releasing, we can say this and assume that it's going to be higher than that. Which right now, a lot of the projections are scary. It's very scary. But, we'll have Halloween and then Thanksgiving and then Christmas, and schools are opening back up in the Northeast, and almost every single one of them has a case by now. And even in New York, where I went to school, Syracuse, where my son was born, they have cases in their school district. So they just opened up like Monday. I don't know, and I say this in almost every interview I do. We shut down schools across the entire country when there were only like 5,000 cases in the country. We have how many now? Florida has 700,000. We shut down when we had 300. We shut down school for the whole semester because we were so terrified of what that would do. And we opened them back up with over 500,000 cases, expecting anything but what is happening to happen. And like I said, we use that as a bare minimum. Like when we do all of our projections, we know it's at least going to be this bad, because if they're letting this data come out, then that's the minimum that they can do. And just assume it's going to be worse. But it's horrible. But when you have people undying, which honest to God, I think that was in large part because I drew so much attention to it. I don't think they would have done that if I hadn't tweeted about it, but it was tragic, and it's the youngest person to die in Florida, so I felt it warranted reporting. But that is a scary thing. It changes our survival rates if they can just undie somebody. Now, if somebody has died since March and they had it and it was a car accident, obviously that person should not be included. But to say that a child who was diagnosed 2 weeks ago and then hospitalized and died sometime there near after had nothing to do with it, you need to provide a better explanation of that once you've already verified that that's why they died. And they don't do that anymore. It's political, and it shouldn't be. It's the science. You should just report the science. That's it. And it seems like it should be that simple, and it should be, but it's not.
Okay.
This is super depressing, everybody. So, should have gotten a glass of wine with this first and start chugging instead of water. God, it's like, Jesus, I just want to That's why I don't do too many interviews like this, because I feel like afterwards I feel so crappy. I'm like, doom, death, despair, lies. And it's like, oh God.
Well, before we take questions, let's do a quick segue that does have a positive vibe to it anyway. So, as I told folks, one of the things that we are going to do today, really in recognition of Rebekah taking the time and effort and coming, giving such a great talk and sharing her experience, especially to our other graduate students, many of whom will be geographers and/or planners going into professional fields after their degrees. Is we wanted to acknowledge that. So, on behalf of the department and as well as Dean Gilbert and the College of Arts and Letters, our dean, and the College of Graduate Studies, we are announcing today a special graduate scholarship for one of our students. Rebekah and I kind of talked about this. The faculty here put a committee together. We wanted to recognize one of our female graduate students who we felt was making a substantial contribution in their work in all the aspects of GIS: science, outreach, education, engagement. So, Kim, if you can put your camera back on, and we lost you there for a second, but I think you're probably still with us. So I'd like to announce that the recipient of the award is going to be Kim Alonso. And Kim, this is a graduate scholarship that will go towards your tuition and fees as they may be for the January semester. So on behalf of everybody, congratulations, Kim. Are you still with us? I think maybe
I am. I don't know if it's working.
I think you just lost your camera feed because of bandwidth, but go ahead and we can hear you. Oh, there you are.
Well, thank you. This is like out of the left field, but thank you. This is amazing. I guess that is a much positive note as the conversation before, but yeah, I don't know what to say. Thank you guys very much.
Well, you're welcome. Congratulations. We do have time. If there are any other questions, I don't want to block up any opportunity. If anybody else wants to ask Rebekah any questions, please go ahead. We have some more time if you want to do that. They're all thinking.
I do want to say congrats, Kim. This was the first kind of like speaking event that I've kind of arranged, and this was before 40 under 40 came out and all that other stuff, so I got like a super cheap rate for me. And I said that I would do this, but I had to, whatever like I was going to be paid to appear had to be matched to a scholarship. And I kind of expected you guys to be like, no, we can't do that. But after they said yes, that's now part of my fee for every speech that I do. I thought it would like, somebody would just like be like, that's ridiculous. But I'm making it a part of everything that I do now. So thank you guys at the department for being willing to do that and consider that, because I feel like that is more impactful than, just showing up and doing the Clinton taking the money and run thing. So, but congrats. They told me that they had a committee review and told me a little bit about you, and you're very, very bright. So, and your questions were very pointed. So, proves it.
Thank you. I actually have a list of other questions that I was going to send via email. Mostly, I guess I do want to ask one more quick question. This may be silly, but have you ever watched the TV show Chernobyl?
Oh my God, yes. It was part of my annual viewing at like, what is it, April? Oh, what day did it happen? April something. But yeah, love it. I've watched it several times. It's amazing.
I just kept thinking over and over again to the last quote from the show when he asks he says to be a scientist is to be naive, and what is the cost of a lie? Instead of, I just keep thinking of that with all this COVID stuff going on right now with the manipulating of data and changing things. It's timely, I guess.
Yeah, and that's also I found, at least, I mean, I'm not, obviously don't know the insides of what went on during Chernobyl.
Yeah.
I actually found that was an instance in which things could have obviously gotten so much worse after the initial accident. And the role and respect of scientists to keep that from being a global catastrophe of a level that we can't even comprehend, and how they were able to get whatever they needed. Gorbachev was like, yeah, whatever science says, do it. That was amazing to me. And aside from the initial, disaster, what happened afterwards is how things should work. You bring in the experts, they tell you and they debate among themselves what's going on, how to deal with it, and then you deal with it, and you deal with, whatever happens afterwards, actually on the ground. But unfortunately, yeah, what happened after that was, well, he killed himself, so let's hope the story ends better than that. Again,
I'm sure it
next
will.
time, wine will be involved. Or you know what? I'm going straight for the mead. We're hitting the hard stuff. But if you guys have, email questions that you want to shoot me, you guys can get my email. I think I can chat. No, can I not chat in this? Chat. I might not get back to them right away. Just because it's, crazy, especially with New York opening up schools and such. Scraping that data is going to be a pain. But you can email me. I try to be reachable as much as possible, and we'll get back to you guys, of course. And yeah, Chernobyl. Oh God, scary. I think it just that scene when they're in the engineering room and things are first going wrong. It just now you gotta make me think about that.
I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, it would have oh no, it's so scary to think about how close they were to making Europe uninhabitable. Europe, like all of Europe and parts of Asia. It's just, whew, God.
So, do we have any more questions for anybody?
Yeah, seriously. Everybody got to stand up, stretch, and be like, breathe after this. Be like, oh my God. But you guys are gonna lead the future. Most of you are the same age as me or very close to it, but you're the future. And yeah, my honest advice to people is be an honest, good person. Honest to God, that is it. Be an honest and good person. And I think those two things got me in a lot of trouble in May. But they're the reason why I'm talking to you now, is because I knew people while I was working there, and they knew me and who I was and what I was doing. And I honest to God believe if you be an honest and good person, it will come back around. And it's done that for me in ways I never would have imagined my life ever. I mean, I was mid-management at the Florida Department of Health before this, for Christ's sake. So, things can change. You can make a difference. One person actually can make a difference. I learned that through this. My God. So you can do it too.
Now, that's a good positive note to end things on. And again, I wanted to thank Rebekah for joining us. And I know she's very, very busy. I wanted to wish her the best of luck and success in her future endeavors. As a geographer, I've spoke to many of my colleagues. Actually, I made contact with you through the American Association of Geographers, folks I know there. And we're all very proud of you. We're very supportive. And you're a good voice for, like you say, good, honest, sound science driving good decisions and policies and lessons every one of us needs to take to heart for whatever work and research and we do. And that's a very strong, positive message you passed on today. So thank you very much. And thanks everybody for joining us. Just a couple reminders then, as Dr. Stempler put in the chat, yes, we're doing the virtual social event on the evening of the 6th. And actually our next colloquium will be on October the 2nd. We're going to have one of our speakers who couldn't join us in the spring, Dr. Victoria Morkel from University of Michigan Flint. She's going to come here and talk about housing vacancy in Ohio that I know, again, is an interest to all of our planners. So everybody, again, thank you, Rebekah. Thank everybody for joining us. Have a safe, enjoyable weekend, and take care and be safe. Thanks, everybody.